you all once again for coming. St. Louis has really turned out to be one of my favorite stops when we do these tours, because it's just always tremendous, and you guys are great, so thank you. I will do what I usually do, read a little bit from this new book, and then tell you a little bit more about it, and then open it up for questions right after that, and then we can cover anything you want to ask, whether it's about the Joe Pickett series, this book, TV shows, anything in general. Happy to answer those questions. So this is 3-inch Teeth, and it came out just on Tuesday this week. So has anybody read it yet? At least one person. Okay, good. Well, I'll begin. Chapter 1, Double Diamond Ranch. Clay Hutmacher Jr., 25, stood knee-high in the 12-Sleek River, casting for trout with a determined look on his face and an engagement ring in his pocket. He was 12 miles from the town of Saddle Spring on the ranch his father managed, and that, he hoped, he would take over someday. It was fall in the mountains of Wyoming, and a day away from the opening of most of the local elk hunting seasons. It was the longest and most pleasant fall he could remember since returning to the ranch after a stint in the military and 3 years in college. Unlike many years when fall was a hard freeze that came out of nowhere and instantly killed all of the greenery, this one had brought out colors he didn't know existed outside of New England. Yellow leaves crunched underfoot and seams of crimson ran up every mountain draw. The late afternoon sun dappled the water and ignited the river cottonwoods and buckbrush along the bank with intense golds and reds. It almost hurt his eyes. A slight breeze rattled through the drying leaves, and hundreds of them had detached upriver and now floated like a tiny yellow armada on the surface of the water. Above him, a bald eagle in a thermal current glided in a lazy circle. The leaves on the water made it difficult to see his indicator bobbing along, so Clay Jr. retrieved his fly line, clipped off the nymphs he'd been using, and replaced them with a heavy articulated streamer. He was outfitted in chest-high waders, a waterproof Sims jacket with a mesh fly fishing vest over it, and a rancher's cap. A lanyard loaded with scissors, spools of tippet, and forceps hung from his neck. A fishing net was attached to the collar of his vest, and a wading staff undulated in the strong current from where it was tied off on his belt. The back of his vest sagged from the weight of the Glock in the rear pocket. Clay never went anywhere without it. The wonderful thing about fly fishing, he'd discovered, was that it was all-consuming. The tactics, the gear, reading the water, the choice of flies, keeping his balance on smooth, round river rocks, all of that fully occupied his mind and pushed out everything else. Fly fishing was like sex in that way, Clay thought. He particularly wanted to take his mind off dinner later that night with Sheridan Pickett. That's when she would see the engagement ring for the very first time. The ring had been in his pocket for a week. He'd just been looking for the right moment, and in his mind, they were already engaged. While he stood leaning slightly against the powerful current with his hip, Clay Jr. heard it crashing in the trees on the opposite hillside. He paused and looked up. A branch snapped, and he noticed that the top of a spindly aspen jerked and shed dead leaves as if something had hit it at its base. At first he thought it was a rock slide. They happened on the steep canyon wall, and sometimes they gathered so much momentum they snapped off trees as they tore down the mountain. He quickly looked over his shoulder at the bank where he'd parked the Polaris Ranger. He wasn't sure he could navigate across the slick stones fast enough before a jumble of large rocks came his way. And that's when a massive tan bear with a dark brown hump on its back emerged from the trees, roared, and threw itself into the river with a loud splash. Not a rock slide, Clay Jr. thought, but a grizzly bear more than twice his size. The bear was in the middle of the river and moving remarkably fast, coming straight at him, swimming straight at him. It had small closed eyes centered in a massive round head. The bear was so large that it produced a wake in the water, until it found the floor of the river. The grizzly closed the distance and rose up onto its back legs and towered over him, blotting out the light. He could see its long coat shimmer as river water sluiced out of it. Long claws were curved like yellow scythes, and the bear was close enough he could smell it. The stink was like wet dog, only 20 times worse. The bear roared at him, and Clay Jr. felt his anus pucker and his limbs go weak. He'd never heard a sound that affected him in such a primal, visceral way. Scrambling, he stepped back, and his boot sole slipped on the top of a round river rock. He lost his balance, and he fell back and to the side and fumbled the Glock into the river. The weapon thumped against the side of his thigh, then slipped beneath the surface, out of sight. At the same time, the bear dropped to all fours and charged. Clay Jr. wanted to shout, "What in the hell have I done to deserve this?" The last look at the bear before he went under was its tiny black eyes, gaping mouth, and long scimitar-like teeth. The grizzly lunged on top of him and pinned him flat on his back to the rocks on the floor of the river, a foot and a half beneath the surface. As the jaws closed around his head, the last sound Clay Jr. heard was the awful crunch of those teeth through his skull. His last thought was, would she have said yes? So, that's how it begins. Because this ranch is located in Joe Pickett's district, Joe gets a call from Clay Hutmacher Sr., wondering if Joe has seen his son, and then a few minutes later calls back and said he has found part of his son on the riverbank. And Joe immediately goes out there looking. He feels the presence of the bear, can't find the bear, but then he starts searching. He finds Clay Jr.'s body, which has been cached, which is what bears do. They take the body and hide it away, cover it with branches and leaves. So Joe immediately calls what's called the Predator Attack Team, which is a real outfit in the state of Wyoming, kind of like a SWAT team for animals. They wear flak jackets, they have semi-automatic weapons, they drop on the scene, and they deal with what wildlife officials call grizzly human encounters. But when they arrive, there's another attack very shortly afterwards, basically in the same place. They can't get the bear, they start to hunt it, they can't find it. And then the Predator Attack Team with Joe start the search for this bear. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in other parts of Wyoming, there are additional bear attacks. And Joe and the team cannot figure out whether this one rogue grizzly bear has gone crazy and covered hundreds of miles attacking people at random, or maybe it's more than one bear at the same time with the same thought in mind. Meanwhile, in Rawlins, in the Wyoming prison, Dallas Cates is being released. If you've read some of the earlier books, you know that Dallas Cates is a champion rodeo cowboy who grew up not far from Saddle String. He's got a very dysfunctional family, and he's done a lot of bad things, including possibly sexually assaulting Joe's other daughter at one point. And Joe has kind of conspired with the rest of law enforcement to put Dallas Cates in prison, even though they couldn't pin the worst things on him. It's kind of trumped up charges. Joe's always felt a little guilty about that, but he wanted to get this guy off the street. And while Dallas Cates has been in prison, the rest of his family has all been killed. They've lost their property. Dallas has lost his reputation, and he's out for revenge as well. So he's got 6 little boxes that he's tattooed on his skin. Each one represents somebody who he's going to go after, who he thinks has put him in prison and done all these things. Those boxes include Nate Romanowski and Joe Pickett. And then Dallas Cates learns about the bear attacks and decides to use them as cover to go after his list. So the story, several stories going on at once. Joe trying to figure out what's going on, just like Joe's always trying to figure out what's going on. The Predator attack team, Dallas Cates, who teams up with a couple of other really bad people to go after that list. And it ends kind of explosively. Some of you are going to get angry with me when you read the ending. That's okay. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Like I said, it's just been out since Tuesday. I think for several reasons, this book has really done well so far. The pre-sales on it were up 49% since the last book. I think that's partly attributed to the TV show, but also partly attributed to the fact that more and more people read the books every year, which is wonderful. So we're got our fingers crossed to see how it does, and thank you for helping it along, and me. So I